A man mocked Judge Judy's gavel as a joke. His own microphone caught every word. What happened next cost him more than just his case. The courtroom was set, the cameras were rolling, and Marcus Chen thought he had it all figured out. He sat in the defendant's chair, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, completely unaware that the small black microphone clipped to his collar was about to become his worst enemy. The studio lights cast their usual glow over Judge Judy Scheindlin's courtroom, where the mahogany bench stood as it always did, elevated and commanding. The familiar setup, the wood-paneled walls, the audience seated in neat rows, all of it felt routine. But this case, this particular Tuesday afternoon taping, would become anything but routine. Judge Judy herself sat at her bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the case file in front of her. At 81 years old, she had presided over thousands of cases, seen every type of defendant imaginable, heard every excuse in the book. Yet something about this case, about this defendant, would test even her legendary patience. Marcus Chen, 28 years old, graphic designer, resident of Queens, sat with the kind of casual confidence that comes from severely underestimating your opponent. His wrinkled button-down shirt, his relaxed posture, the way he leaned back in his chair like he was settling in to watch a movie rather than defend himself in a lawsuit, all of it screamed one thing. He didn't take this seriously. Beside him, his friend Trevor fidgeted nervously, eyes darting between Marcus and the judge, clearly understanding something Marcus didn't. Across the aisle, the plaintiff, Raymond Foster, a 52-year-old landlord with graying temples and a folder thick with evidence, sat with the quiet confidence of a man who knew he had the truth on his side. He wasn't here for drama. He was here for justice, for the $4,500 Marcus owed him, and he had every receipt, every photo, every document to prove it. But here's what nobody in that courtroom knew yet. That $4,500 was about to become much, much more, and the reason why, the moment that would change everything, was waiting just minutes away, hidden in plain sight. Ready to be caught by the very technology Marcus had forgotten, was listening. Judge Judy's gavel, the small wooden hammer that Marcus would soon call meaningless, sat beside her nameplate, waiting for its moment. What Marcus was about to say, what that microphone was about to catch, would turn this simple landlord-tenant dispute into one of the most watched, most shared, most talked about episodes in Judge Judy history. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, you need to understand how we got here. Why Marcus thought he could walk into America's toughest courtroom and walk out unscathed, and what Judge Judy was about to teach him about respect, consequences, and the power of that little toy hammer he was about to mock. Before we dive into this incredible case, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing where my viewers are around the world. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss more unbelievable cases like this one. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Before we dive into what Marcus said that shocked everyone in that courtroom, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you do not want to miss how Judge Judy responds to what's coming. This is one of those moments you'll want to tell your friends about. Now let's see how this all started to fall apart. The case itself seemed straightforward enough, at least on paper. Raymond Foster versus Marcus Chen. Landlord versus tenant, a tale as old as the American rental system itself. The complaint was simple. Marcus owed 3 months of unpaid rent totaling $4,500. And he had left Foster's studio apartment in Queens looking like a disaster zone. But as Judge Judy had learned over her decades on the bench, simple cases often revealed the most complex characters, and Marcus Chen was about to prove that theory spectacularly. Judge Judy had built her empire on cases exactly like this one. For over 25 years, her show had dominated daytime television, pulling in millions of viewers who tuned in not just for the legal drama, but for her. Judith Scheindlin, the former Manhattan family court judge who had seen the absolute worst of humanity during her time on the criminal bench, had somehow become America's most beloved judicial figure. Her sharp wit, her refusal to tolerate nonsense, her ability to see through lies with surgical precision, these were the qualities that had made her a cultural icon. But here's what made Judge Judy different from every other TV judge, every other courtroom show that had tried and failed to capture her magic. She genuinely didn't care about being liked. She cared about the truth. She cared about the law. She cared about holding people accountable for their choices. And when someone walked into her courtroom with an attitude, with disrespect, with the kind of arrogance that suggested they thought they were above the rules, that's when Judge Judy became truly formidable. Marcus Chen had no idea what he was walking into. His friends had warned him, of course. Everyone knows Judge Judy. Everyone has seen the clips, heard the stories, watched her eviscerate defendants who dared to lie or make excuses. But Marcus, in his infinite confidence, had waved off those warnings with a laugh. It's just TV, he had told Trevor over beers the week before the taping. She can't be as tough as everyone says. It's all edited to make her look scary. I'll just tell my side of the story. and people will see that Foster is trying to scam me. Trevor had shaken his head even then, knowing his friend was making a massive miscalculation. But Marcus wouldn't listen. He never did. The apartment in question was a 450-square-foot studio in a pre-war building in Astoria, Queens. Marcus had moved in 11 months earlier, signed a standard lease agreement, paid his security deposit and first month's rent without complaint. For the first 8 months, everything had been fine. Marcus paid on time. Foster left him alone. It was the kind of unremarkable landlord-tenant relationship that both parties preferred. Then winter came, and according to Marcus, the heat stopped working properly. Here's where the stories diverged sharply. Marcus claimed he had complained multiple times about inadequate heating, that he had sent text messages to Foster, that he had even called him directly. When Foster allegedly refused to fix the problem, Marcus made a decision. He would withhold rent until the heat was fixed. It was, in his mind, a reasonable response to an unreasonable landlord. He wasn't trying to skip out on payment. He was exercising what he believed were his tenant rights. Foster, on the other hand, told a completely different story. He claimed Marcus had never once complained about the heat, never sent a formal written complaint, never filed anything with the city's housing authority. The text messages Marcus referenced, Foster said they didn't exist, or if they did, they were vague complaints that never specifically mentioned a heating issue. And even if the heat had been a problem, Foster argued, Marcus had no legal right to simply stop paying rent. There were proper channels for tenant complaints, legal processes to follow, ways to handle disputes that didn't involve unilateral decisions to withhold payment. But the rent dispute was only part of the problem. When Marcus finally moved out, owing 3 months of back rent, he left the apartment in what Foster described as deplorable condition. Holes in the walls, some small, some large enough to require professional patching, carpet stains that no amount of cleaning could remove. The kind of deep-set discoloration that meant replacement was the only option. Scratches on the hardwood floor near the kitchen, a broken window blind, scuff marks along the baseboards, general filth that suggested the apartment hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Foster had documented everything with photographs dated and thorough. He had receipts for the repairs, invoices from contractors, estimates for the work that still needed to be done. He had done his homework, built his case with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that would make any lawyer proud. And he had the ace in the hole, the move-in inspection report that Marcus himself had signed 11 months earlier, stating in clear black and white text that the apartment was in good condition at the start of the tenancy. Marcus's defense? The damage was pre-existing, the landlord was lying, the photos were misleading, and besides, if Foster had just fixed the heat like he was supposed to, none of this would have happened anyway. It was a defense built on sand, lacking documentation, lacking evidence, lacking anything resembling a coherent legal strategy. But Marcus believed it would work because Marcus believed he was smarter than everyone else in the room. He had agreed to appear on Judge Judy's show for a simple reason. The show paid the judgment regardless of who won. If he lost, he wouldn't actually have to pay Foster out of his own pocket. The show's production company would cut the check. And if by some miracle he won, well, Foster would get nothing and Marcus would walk away clean. It was in Marcus's mind a no-lose situation. He got a free trip to the studio, a chance to be on TV, and no real financial risk. What he failed to understand was that some losses can't be measured in dollars. Judge Judy had seen 1,000 Marcus Chens walk through her courtroom doors. Young, cocky, convinced that their charm or their excuses or their ability to talk fast would somehow override the facts. She had developed a sixth sense for defendants who thought they could outsmart the process, and that sense was tingling the moment she looked at Marcus Chen's case file. As the bailiff Bird called the court to order and the cameras began recording, Judge Judy looked up from her papers and saw Marcus sitting there with that smirk, that casual lean, that unmistakable air of someone who thought this was all a game. And in that moment, before a single word had been spoken, Judge Judy knew exactly what kind of case this was going to be. The only question was how spectacularly Marcus would self-destruct. She wouldn't have to wait long to find out. The case began like any other. Judge Judy, her hands folded on the bench, her expression neutral but alert, turned first to Raymond Foster. "Mr. Foster, tell me what happened here." Her voice was direct, no warmth, no hostility, just pure efficiency. This was how she always started, giving the plaintiff the floor, letting them lay out their case before she started dissecting it. Foster cleared his throat and began, his voice steady and respectful. "Your Honor, I rented my studio apartment to Mr. Chen for $1,500 a month. He paid fine for 8 months, then suddenly stopped. No explanation, no communication, just stopped paying. When he finally moved out, I walked into the apartment and it was destroyed. Holes in the walls, ruined carpet, the place was filthy. I'm here for 3 months of unpaid rent, that's $4,500. Judge Judy nodded, already flipping through the evidence Foster had submitted. Photos of the apartment, clear and damning, showed exactly what he had described. A hole near the bedroom closet, roughly the size of a fist. Dark stains on the beige carpet that looked like wine or coffee, ground in deep. Dust and grime coating the windows. She held up one photo, examining it over her glasses. "This is how he left it?" Foster nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, I had to hire cleaners, hire contractors. That's not normal wear and tear. That's damage." Judge Judy set the photo down and turned her attention to Marcus, and this is where the temperature in the room began to shift. "Mr. Chen, you owe this man $4,500 and you trashed his apartment. What's your excuse?" The word excuse hung in the air, already framing Marcus's defense as inadequate before he even opened his mouth. But Marcus, either missing the warning sign or choosing to ignore it, leaned forward with an easy confidence. "Your Honor, with all due respect, that's not the full story. The apartment had problems when I moved in. The heat didn't work properly all winter. I was freezing in there and Foster refused to fix it. I withheld rent because I was paying for a service I wasn't getting. And those photos make it look worse than it was. Some of that damage was already there." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in her neutral facade. "You withheld rent? Are you a lawyer, Mr. Chen?" Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness of the question. "No, I'm a graphic designer, but I know my rights as a tenant." "Oh, you know your rights?" Judge Judy's voice rose slightly, a warning sign that anyone familiar with her show would recognize immediately. "Then tell me, counselor, did you file a complaint with the city? Did you put your heating complaint in writing? Did you follow any legal procedure whatsoever before you decided to play judge and jury with your landlord's money?" Marcus shifted in his seat, his confidence wavering. "I texted him about it. Multiple times." Judge Judy held up a hand. "Show me the texts." Marcus fumbled with his phone, scrolling through messages while the courtroom waited in uncomfortable silence. After a long moment, he looked up, his face slightly flushed. "I must have deleted them, but I definitely sent them." A few audience members exchanged glances. Trevor, sitting beside Marcus, closed his eyes briefly, recognizing the hole his friend was digging. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, her expression now one of barely concealed irritation. "You deleted the only evidence that would support your claim? How convenient. Mr. Foster, did you receive any complaints about heating?" Foster shook his head. "Not one, Your Honor, the heat worked fine. I have other tenants in the building, nobody else complained. He's making this up to justify not paying rent." Judge Judy picked up the lease agreement, flipping to a specific page. "Mr. Chen, did you sign a move-in inspection report?" Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Yes, but I didn't really read it carefully. I was in a hurry to move in." "You didn't read it carefully," Judge Judy repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Let me read it to you then. It says, and I quote, 'Tenant acknowledges that the apartment is in good and clean condition with no existing damage.' Your signature is right here at the bottom. So either you lied when you signed this or you're lying now. Which is it?" The courtroom had gone completely silent. Marcus's face was now visibly red, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. He stammered, "I'm not lying, the damage happened over time and the heat really was a problem." Judge Judy cut him off. "Over time? You lived there for 11 months. Normal wear and tear doesn't include holes in walls and destroyed carpets. And as for the heat, you have no proof, no documentation, no complaints filed with anyone except apparently some magical disappearing text messages." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Mr. Chen, do you think I was born yesterday?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The trap had been set, and he was firmly caught in it. Judge Judy glanced at the evidence again, then announced, "I'm going to take a 5-minute recess to review the repair receipts and utility records. Everyone stay seated." She rose from her bench, her black robe flowing behind her as she disappeared through the door to her chambers. The courtroom remained silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Marcus sat frozen, his mind racing, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. And then, in what would become the biggest mistake of his life, he turned to Trevor and forgot about the small black microphone still clipped to his collar, still live, still broadcasting every word to the entire courtroom. The recess should have been Marcus's moment to regroup, to think carefully about his next move, to perhaps show some humility. Instead, it became the moment that would define the entire case and haunt him for years to come. Judge Judy had exited through the door behind her bench, and the courtroom settled into an uncomfortable quiet. The audience members whispered to each other, speculating about how the case would end. The bailiff stood at his post, arms folded, expression unreadable. Raymond Foster sat calmly, reviewing his documents one more time, confident in his evidence. And Marcus, feeling the weight of how badly the case was going, turned to Trevor with frustration written all over his face. What Marcus didn't realize, what he had completely forgotten in his anxiety and wounded pride, was that his microphone was still active. The small wireless lavalier clipped to his collar, the one the production assistant had attached before the taping began, was still transmitting. Still feeding his voice to the overhead speakers, to the production booth, to every single person in that courtroom. Marcus leaned toward Trevor, shaking his head in disbelief at how Judge Judy had questioned him. And then in a moment of breathtaking stupidity, he said it. Man, this is such a joke. She sits up there with that little toy hammer like she's running the Supreme Court or something. It's a TV show. That gavel doesn't even mean anything real. She probably got it from a costume shop. This whole thing is ridiculous. The words echoed through the courtroom speakers with perfect, devastating clarity. Every syllable, every dismissive word, every ounce of disrespect broadcast to everyone present. The reaction was instantaneous and visceral. The audience gasped collectively, a sharp intake of breath that filled the room. Several people in the front row visibly recoiled, their faces showing a mixture of shock and secondhand embarrassment. A woman in the third row covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide. A teenage boy in the back started to laugh but immediately stopped when he saw the severity on everyone else's faces. Trevor's head snapped toward Marcus, his eyes huge with panic. He grabbed Marcus's arm urgently, pointing at the microphone on his collar. "Dude, your mic," he hissed, but it was too late. The damage was done, the words were out there, irretrievable and damning. Marcus looked down at the small black device, saw the tiny green light still glowing, still active, and the color drained from his face completely. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. He had just mocked Judge Judy, called her gavel a toy, dismissed the entire proceeding as meaningless, and he had done it on a live microphone in her own courtroom. The courtroom remained frozen in that terrible silence, everyone waiting for the inevitable. Marcus sat paralyzed, staring at his microphone like it was a live grenade. Trevor had physically moved his chair away, creating visible distance between himself and the disaster. Raymond Foster allowed himself the faintest smile, knowing that Marcus had just handed Judge Judy all the ammunition she could possibly need. The seconds crawled by, each one heavier than the last, until finally the door behind the bench opened. Judge Judy emerged, and everything about her demeanor had changed. She walked slowly, deliberately, her movements measured and purposeful. She wasn't rushing. She had all the time in the world, and everyone in that courtroom knew that Marcus's time had just run out. She sat down, adjusted her robe, and reached for her gavel. The same gavel Marcus had just called a toy, a meaningless prop from a costume shop. She wrapped her fingers around it, holding it firmly, and let the silence stretch just a bit longer. Then her eyes locked onto Marcus, and when she spoke, her voice was calm, cold, and absolutely lethal. "Mr. Chen," she began, and the single tap of her gavel against the sound block cracked through the room like a gunshot. "This little toy hammer, as you so eloquently called it moments ago, represents something you clearly don't understand. It represents the law. It represents order. It represents consequences." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. Marcus looked like he wanted to sink through the floor and disappear forever. Judge Judy continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I've been practicing law for over 50 years, Mr. Chen. I was a prosecutor in New York. I was a family court judge for 25 years, handling cases involving child abuse, domestic violence, and custody battles that would break your heart. I've seen real criminals, real predators, real monsters sit in that chair where you're sitting. And you know what? Most of them showed more respect for this process than you just did." She leaned forward, her eyes boring into him. "You walked into this courtroom thinking it was all a game, didn't you? Thinking that because there are cameras, because this is on television, that somehow the law doesn't apply the same way? Let me educate you. This is binding arbitration. The judgment I'm about to render is legally enforceable. It's not a suggestion, it's not entertainment. It's real law with real consequences, and you're about to find out exactly how real it is." Marcus tried to speak, his voice barely a whisper. "Your Honor, I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean for me to hear it," Judge Judy cut him off sharply. "That's very different from not meaning it. You meant every word. You just didn't think you'd get caught. But here's a lesson about the modern world, Mr. Chen. Assume every microphone is hot. Assume everything you say can and will be heard. You failed that test spectacularly." She picked up the repair receipts, the damage photos, the lease agreement. "Now let's talk about your case, since you think this is all just a show. Judgment for the plaintiff, Mr. Raymond Foster, in the amount of $4,500 for 3 months of unpaid rent. Additionally, judgment for the plaintiff for documented damages to the apartment in the amount of $2,200. Your total, Mr. Chen, is $6,700. Marcus's head shot up, panic flooding his face. "But the case was only for $4,500. Judge Judy's expression didn't change. The small claims limit in this jurisdiction is $10,000. Your landlord was being generous by only asking for part of what you owe. I reviewed the full documentation during my recess. The same recess where you decided to mock this court. The damage is documented, proven, and you have no defense. You're paying it all. Judge Judy wasn't finished. She held up the gavel one more time, making sure Marcus could see it clearly. This toy hammer, as you called it, has just cost you an additional $2,200. Maybe next time you'll think before you speak. Maybe next time you'll show some respect for the judicial process, whether it's in a television studio or a traditional courtroom. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn that your actions have consequences. She brought the gavel down one final time, the sound echoing with absolute finality. Case dismissed. We're adjourned. The courtroom remained silent for a beat. Then the audience began to murmur, the shock giving way to animated conversation. Judge Judy rose from her bench and exited without another glance at Marcus, leaving him sitting there utterly destroyed. Marcus remained frozen in his seat, his hands covering his face, shoulders slumped in complete defeat. Everything he had thought about this experience, every assumption he had made, had been shattered in the span of 20 minutes. He had walked in with confidence and walked out with nothing but humiliation and a $6,700 judgment hanging over his head. Trevor stood up quickly, clearly desperate to escape the scene. "Man, I gotta go," he muttered, not even looking at Marcus as he headed for the exit. The friend who had agreed to be a witness, who had tried to warn him, wanted nothing to do with the fallout. The bailiff approached Marcus with a firm but not unkind tone. "Sir, you need to exit through the side door." Marcus stumbled to his feet, his legs unsteady, and walked toward the exit like a man heading to his own execution. As he reached the door, he could hear the audience behind him still talking, still processing what they had just witnessed. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Raymond Foster was surrounded by production staff for his post-case interview. His face showed relief and satisfaction, but not cruelty. "Justice was served today," he told the camera. "I didn't want to be harsh. I only asked for the rent he owed me. But Mr. Chen had to go and disrespect the judge, disrespect the process. Judge Judy saw right through him and held him accountable not just for the money but for his attitude. That young man learned an expensive lesson today about respect and responsibility." Foster's words were measured, factual, lacking any sense of vindictiveness. He had come for what he was owed, and he had gotten that and more. Marcus, exiting through a different corridor, was met by another production assistant with a camera. "Mr. Chen, any comments on the judgment?" The assistant's tone was professional, but there was an unmistakable eagerness in her eyes. Knowing this footage would be gold for the show's promotional materials, Marcus held up his hand, blocking the camera lens. No comments. I just want to leave. Please." His voice cracked with emotion, all his earlier bravado completely gone. He pushed past the camera crew and headed toward the parking lot, with Trevor reluctantly following several steps behind. "I told you, man," Trevor finally said once they were outside. "I told you Judge Judy doesn't play games. You should have just been honest, been respectful, taken your lumps, but you had to run your mouth." Marcus whirled on him, anger flashing in his eyes. "Now you tell me? Where was this advice before I went in there?" Trevor shook his head. "I did tell you. You didn't listen. You never listen." Inside the production booth, the crew was already buzzing with excitement. The segment producer was frantically typing notes, knowing they had just captured television gold. "This is going to be one of our biggest episodes," she said to her colleague. "The moment that mic caught him, I knew. This is viral material." The audio engineer rewound the recording, playing back Marcus's insult again. "In 12 years working on this show, I have never seen someone destroy themselves that completely." He literally handed her the case on a silver platter. Social media, though the episode wouldn't air for months, was already starting to stir. Someone in the audience had posted on a Judge Judy fan forum within minutes of leaving the studio. "Just saw a taping where a defendant called JJ's Gavel a toy from a costume shop, on a hot mic. She destroyed him, added $2,200 to his judgment. This episode is going to break the internet when it airs." The post had dozens of replies within an hour, all expressing disbelief and eagerness to see the footage. For Marcus, sitting in his car in the studio parking lot, the reality was beginning to fully sink in. He pulled up his phone and started searching whether he could appeal the judgment. Legal forums quickly crushed that hope. Binding arbitration meant final judgment, no appeals, no do-overs. $6,700 plus the humiliation was now his permanent reality. He had thought appearing on Judge Judy would vindicate him, prove that he was right and Foster was wrong. Instead, he had become a cautionary tale about disrespect, arrogance, and the importance of knowing when to keep your mouth shut. 3 months later, the episode aired on a Tuesday afternoon, and within hours, Marcus Chen's life changed forever in ways he never could have anticipated. The moment his insult was caught on the microphone, became an instant viral sensation. Clips flooded YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Reaction videos appeared by the hundreds, with creators pausing at the exact moment Marcus's face went pale, analyzing every micro-expression, every word of Judge Judy's devastating response. The episode shattered viewing records for the show, becoming one of the most watched Judge Judy episodes in the program's entire history. Hashtags like #toy Gavel, respect the judge, and microphone fail trended for days. Memes spread across the internet with Marcus's shocked face becoming a symbol of instant regret, used in contexts far beyond the courtroom. But for Marcus, the viral fame was a nightmare, not a dream. His name was now permanently attached to one of the most embarrassing moments ever captured on daytime television. When he applied for jobs, potential employers would Google his name and find dozens of articles about his Judge Judy disaster. Interview after interview went cold once the story came up. "So you're the guy from Judge Judy?" one hiring manager asked, barely suppressing a smile. Marcus tried to explain, tried to contextualize it, but there was no coming back from it. His dates went similarly. Women would recognize him from the show, or friends would send them the clip after seeing his dating profile. "Oh my God, you're Toy Gavel guy," one date exclaimed in the middle of dinner, pulling out her phone to show him the very clip he had tried desperately to forget. The relationship ended before dessert arrived. At family gatherings, relatives brought it up with a mixture of amusement and disappointment. His mother, bless her heart, tried to be supportive, but even she admitted, "Marcus, what were you thinking?" Judge Judy, of all people? The $6,700 judgment was paid by the show's production company, as per the standard agreement contestants sign. Marcus didn't have to reach into his own pocket, but that was small consolation. The cost to his reputation, his mental health, his future opportunities. That bill would take years to settle. He had wanted his moment of fame, his chance to prove he was right. Instead, he became famous for being spectacularly wrong, and the entire world got to watch it happen. Trevor, his former friend, distanced himself completely after the episode aired. "I can't be associated with that," he told mutual friends. "Everyone knows I was sitting right there." I tried to warn him, but now I'm part of the story too. Their friendship, built over years, ended because Marcus couldn't control his mouth for 5 minutes. Raymond Foster, the landlord, used the judgment money to repair his apartment and find a better tenant. But more than the money, he appreciated that someone had finally held Marcus accountable. That young man thought he could charm his way out of responsibility, Foster told a reporter who contacted him after the episode went viral. Judge Judy taught him what his parents apparently never did, that respect matters, that your word matters, and that consequences are real. Foster never gloated, never rubbed it in. He simply moved on with his life, secure in the knowledge that justice had been served. For the millions who watched the episode, the lessons were clear and powerful. In workplaces across America, managers showed the clip during training sessions about professionalism and assuming microphones are always live. In law schools, professors used it as an example of how not to conduct yourself in any legal proceeding. Parents showed it to their teenagers as a warning about disrespect and arrogance. The story transcended the courtroom and became a cultural touchstone about accountability in the digital age. Judge Judy herself never commented specifically on the Marcus Chen case, but in interviews that followed, she reiterated her philosophy. Respect isn't optional. The law isn't a game, and if you walk into any courtroom, television or otherwise, thinking you can talk your way out of the truth, you're going to learn a very expensive lesson. Her words resonated because Marcus's story proved them absolutely correct. The episode became required viewing for anyone considering appearing on a court show, a stark reminder that these proceedings, despite being televised, carry real legal weight and real consequences. As years passed, the video remained online, a permanent digital record of what happens when arrogance meets accountability. Marcus eventually moved to a different state, trying to build a new life away from the shadow of his most famous moment. He found work, though never in his chosen field, and learned to live with the fact that Toy Gavel Guy would follow him forever. But perhaps in the quiet moments of reflection, he understood what Judge Judy had tried to teach him. That respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost everything. That words have weight, especially when you forget the microphone is listening, and that a gavel, whether in a traditional courthouse or a television studio, represents something far bigger than wood and metal. It represents justice, accountability, and the simple truth that actions have consequences. The studio lights may have dimmed that day, and the cameras may have stopped rolling, but the lesson lived on. Judge Judy's gavel, the one Marcus called a meaningless toy, had taught him the most expensive lesson of his life. And somewhere in courtrooms real and televised, that lesson continues to echo with every strike of wood against wood, reminding us all that respect for the law is never negotiable, and consequences are always real. What an incredible story of how one moment of disrespect changed everything. Marcus learned the hard way that Judge Judy's gavel isn't a toy, and consequences are always real. If this story gave you something to think about, hit that subscribe button right now because we bring you powerful true stories like this every single week. Smash that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson about respect and accountability, and drop a comment below telling me, have you ever said something you immediately regretted, or witnessed someone disrespect authority and face instant karma? I read every comment and I'd love to hear your stories. Remember, in a world where every microphone might be live and every moment might be recorded, respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost you everything. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we dive into another unbelievable true story. Until then, think before you speak, respect the process, and never ever forget that the mic might be on.